Hi, I'm Tyler, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics. In this episode, we're going to be reviewing Billy Wilder's masterpiece, Some Like It Hot, as well as the newest Paul Thomas Anderson movie, The Phantom Thread. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the show, brought to you by Groupthink Productions and FVTV. Joining us from the far-flung wastelands of the state formerly known as Virginia is AJ, once again.
I'm happy to be back.
Yes, we haven't seen you since Dunkirk, so...
It has been a while, yeah, that was this summer.
Stupid chicken. Anyway, ignoring the chicken. We're going to be starting out with Billy Wilder's Some Like It Hot, and I guess we're calling this Fashion Week because both of our movies are very clothing-oriented in a way.
Sure, some more affecting personality than others, but yeah, this is a classic comedy that I hadn't yet seen. I was really excited to watch it, and it didn't disappoint.
That's very concise.
I like to be. Banter.
We've done at least one Billy Wilder film so far. We did Sunset Boulevard last summer.
Okay.
And I like Billy Wilder quite a bit. He is a very eclectic director with a kind of a very broad voice who can do a lot of different things.
So I've heard. I was ashamed and frankly appalled to learn that this was my first Billy Wilder. I was looking at his filmography and couldn't believe that I hadn't seen any of his others. So I think this is a great one to start on, and I can't wait to kind of go on a Billy Wilder kick from this. Yeah, The Apartment, Double Indemnity, Sunset Boulevard, as you said.
Ace in the Hole.
Just so many, so varied. And this, probably his best comedy. He has done a few, but I think this is probably considered his most acclaimed comedy.
Yeah, I think this benefits a lot from him being able to be kind of an edgelord with it. This is, what year was this? 1950, late 50s?
59.
59. And this does not feel like a 50s movie. It feels like a late 60s movie. I wouldn't say it's exploitational at all, but
it's definitely not something you'd expect from the nuclear family dynamic of the 50s.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, Hollywood had this very stringent code called the Hays Code from the 1940s into the 1950s, and essentially it was this kind of self-censorship deal where they said, we're not going to make morally questionable content because if we do, the Catholic Legion of Decency is going to destroy us, and we need to keep things a little clean. So they just kind of told their creatives, we're not going to do anything. So they kicked out a lot of people, and they kind of had to reform. And this kind of hit at the very end of it, right as the studio system was starting to buckle a little bit, and there was room for hiccups, essentially.
Sure.
And
in the 60s is really when it kind of blew wide open. Almost anything goes.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, you could kind of tell that the entropy had already started to take hold a bit, because if you watch a lot of 50s movies, there's a lot of double entendre latent dialogue.
Sure. I mean, the screwball comedy,
yeah.
Even going back as far as the 30s, was all about that, all about kind of
there was
clever ways to get around the code, to portray
there was a lot of room
meaning.
to be that way in the early 30s, though, because if you go back and watch the pre-code films from the early 30s, there was like...
Oh, they were racy.
There's a lot of racy stuff. There was no like extreme, but there was still a lot of violence and a lot of implied sexuality and stuff like that in those films. But Hayes really didn't hit till the late 30s, but that was a good 20 years where the films were just like not happening. But
right. And yeah, speaking of this movie is quite yeah, you say it's surprising it came out as early as it did, but I also, watching it, was thinking that you know, much later towards our present, it couldn't be made either. It makes some very I was just thinking, watching it, there's no way this movie could have been made today.
We say that a lot about like Blazing Saddles and such, but I never heard that for Some Like It Hot.
Not the subject matter. That's becoming more and more appropriate. But many of the digs kind of they make at their situation, and also the treatment of the women in that movie, while admittedly hilarious, and the writing in this is just spot on. Every line is just perfectly delivered, perfectly written for the situation. But I mean, can you imagine the comments made about transgenders, homosexuals, feminists in this movie?
There'd be quite a lot of
There's no way it would
discussion.
fly.
Yeah, let's not dance on eggshells here. But yeah, it's so I guess the plot involves. It starts out kind of like a hard-bitten like a crime thriller almost.
Yeah, it's very much in the same vein as the original Scarface, The Big House,
It's
Alibi,
prohibition-
kind of the
yeah.
early 30s, late 20s,
It's
as
like
when it's set.
It's Prohibition era, so it's like 1929, I think, in this story. And main characters are two musicians, and they accidentally witness a huge multiple murder in
The
Chicago.
St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Okay, yeah, and it's in Chicago, so they keep name dropping all the areas around here, which is nice. It's like, we're gonna go to Champaign in an hour. How are we supposed to get there that fast?
All the way to Urbana. Takes like 2 hours now.
Well, now, yeah, but they'd have to walk or something. I don't know.
Right, and they sold their overcoats, or they
Yes.
betted on the horses. So that's a running theme. Is one of the characters played by Tony Curtis is just constantly getting into these sticky situations, and it just continues to escalate from betting on horses, betting on other things, witnessing the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and almost getting killed by the mob, to having to hide from the mob as women musicians.
Yes, that's the big hook of the film. You have the two main leads, Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon, and
Both brilliant in this.
they're both brilliant comedians, and they have to dress as female musicians to get on board a train so they can escape, I think, all the way to Florida,
Right.
so they can get out of Chicago.
Millionaire Land.
Yeah.
Yeah, they join up with this female band. One of the members is, of course, Marilyn Monroe as Sugarcane Kowalczyk, which I appreciated the Polish representation there. And she's also kind of running away from something, running away from her past relationships with men, just hoping she can find a nice guy to settle down with. And of course, these two guys can't reveal themselves, but both, obviously because she's Marilyn Monroe, can't resist her, and comedy ensues.
Yeah, her depiction I was surprised by, because she's really funny, and she does a great job with the performance. So that's a surprisingly racy performance for the 1950s. But
I mean, looking at her other movies as well, I mean, that was her character, that was her persona in pop culture. Just a sex icon, but also a great personality. Pretty much everyone loved her. Guys wanted her, women wanted to be her.
I was reading up on that a little bit, and a lot of what I'd heard was that her career was kind of stymied by her early films, because she did a lot of films that typecast her as like the blonde,
Sure.
Which is kind of unfortunate, because she really does have a lot of range in this, but.
And I was surprised to find, also looking at her filmography, she was in Best Picture winner All About Eve in 1950, before she broke big and became Marilyn Monroe as we know her today. So she was in quite a few known movies, but she didn't become a star until the 50s.
Yeah, and then she died young, so she
Very young, 36, I believe.
This was like right before she died too, like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, very very shortly before. This was one of her last big roles.
Yeah, I did the math, and I was like, man, that is just tragic. Like, this is like the swan song of Marilyn Monroe. But.
And she's great in it. I think there's not a lot of better films, not a lot of better performances that you can go on. Even though this wasn't her last, I think this is definitely one up there with The 7-Year Itch, and The Prince and something. I'm blanking right now, but definitely one of her best, and I think one of the ones she's most remembered for.
But yeah, remembered for sure. I don't know how many people remember. Well, yeah, of course we'd remember something like All About Eve or any of the other Billy
Well,
Wilder.
and everybody knows the steam grate scene from 7-Year Itch. So even if you've never seen a Marilyn Monroe movie, you've seen clips, you've seen pictures. She's an icon, and she's timeless. I think this movie just proves that and showcases it.
I mean, you still see, you go to used movie stores, and they'll still have Marilyn Monroe posters, and those generic poster bins where they'll have 5,000 posters, and Marvel Comics and
The Andy
So-
Warhol painting of
Yeah.
Marilyn Monroe, of course.
Yeah, it's like generic stuff, and there'll be like 2 or 3 Marilyn Monroe ones, and I'm always surprised by that because it seems like I could see that there being an audience for that, but if there's that much of a commercial appeal that they're still releasing merchandise with her nowadays, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I think women like her, Audrey Hepburn, I think, also kind of still have that classy appeal that I think is still idolized today. So yeah, I don't think their appeal, their personalities will ever be tarnished with time,
Well, not necessarily tarnished. I just assume,
or even
like a lot of,
fade away. I think
Yeah, exactly. That's
they've left quite a lasting legacy.
yeah, because there's a lot of people like 50s movies and people that just aren't remembered that well anymore.
Sure.
I mean, we've talked about that several times on the show, where there's just like not a general, like a lot of people who remember a lot of the older stuff. And
Even Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, huge stars of the day, made many movies before and after, but even though they're the two leads of the movie, I would say, Marilyn Monroe just overshadows both of them in terms, as we've seen throughout history now.
Sure.
I think she's just multiple times more famous to this day.
Sure. But that definitely gets back to the point of like why we do this segment. We want people to kind of see these old movies.
Absolutely.
That's all the time we have for this segment. Join us shortly. We'll be reviewing Paul Thomas Anderson's The Phantom Thread. Stay tuned.
Does this help at all?
Anything helps, ma'am. Just try to get some sleep now.
I can't sleep.
Yeah, me neither. I'm on my way.
Hello, welcome back to this segment. Now we get to talk about The Phantom Thread, which apparently I've been saying wrong this entire time. So apparently I guess we saw 2 different movies, but,
Well,
which is weird because we saw it together, so.
I enjoyed both of them. I think they were both great. I think both masterpieces of Paul Thomas Anderson's.
That would be great if someone just like, if some director was like an auteur and he just like, I'm going to direct 2 movies. One's going to be the title, and then the other one's going to be the title with the word "the" in front of it.
It could be just like the two. It's like the Zack Snyder versus the Joss Whedon cut.
It's like The Predator and then Predator. So it's,
Right. You got to switch it up.
but yeah, so we saw Phantom Thread at the Music Box this week, and its opening is one of the like 9 theaters in the country that has 70 millimeters still available. So
Yeah, it was my first time going to the Music Box Theater, and what a classy movie to see there in such a historic theater.
they had this lovely booklet that comes with it.
Yeah,
so.
it was a great experience and a work of art, really.
And they overcharge
See.
on their movies, like the DVDs they sell there. But yes,
But no matter.
I wanted my copy of Man Called Ove. I didn't want to pay $30, but whatever. So yes, Paul Thomas Anderson, as you called him, hipster Kubrick, and then followed immediately by Kubrick as hipster Kubrick. But
This is his 8th film, 9th
I
film?
thought it was the 9th, but apparently it's his 8th.
Okay. I won't bother to count right now. But I've watched through his filmography before. This fits right in, I think, as another technically flawless, really. He really crafts these movies so well so that there's not really an aspect of it that is lacking. The acting is superb. The writing is fantastic. Dialogue. Johnny Greenwood's score, I think, really stood out to me. The Radiohead guitarist has become one of the best composers, I think, working in movies today.
He's the composer was the former guitarist for Radiohead?
Guitarist for Radiohead, Johnny Greenwood. Yeah,
My
he's worked with
gosh.
Paul Thomas Anderson before on There Will Be Blood, I think in other movies as well. Another fantastic score.
That guy's got amazing range then. Because
No kidding.
this was like a classical, like a classical orchestra. Like very pristine and formal and...
Yeah, very 50s kind of classical vibe. good soft piano, beautiful strings. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. That stood out to me. The costume design, of course, being a movie about dressmaking, I think just was unparalleled and is a shoo-in for the Oscar this year.
I don't know if this would be considered Oscar bait because Paul Thomas Anderson makes movies that
It
are
kind of is. Period piece, Daniel Day-Lewis. It's coming out in
that sense,
December.
yes.
It's Oscar bait, but I don't mind it. It didn't feel like Oscar bait.
Oscar
I know
bait
what
always
you're saying.
feels when I generally don't. To me, Oscar bait is always something that's slightly subpar that has all those elements to it. So if it can be. I'm not gonna. I won't just dismiss something as Oscar bait if it has like all those features like period piece and masterclass performance and epic romance and all these things. Obviously, the Oscar committee loves that sort of thing, but
And I think the Oscar committee will love this as well.
the whims of the Oscar committee will never be understood by the minds of men. So.
Sadly, no. So this movie stars Daniel Day-Lewis in his final performance.
Cannot put enough quotation marks
We'll
around
see how
that,
long
but
that lasts. I don't think we'll ever say no to another
needs to-
Daniel Day-Lewis movie.
He needs to retire to his career as a fashion designer now. So
Yeah, now that he's played a fashion designer, he needs to go back to fashion designing.
he's building the brand. That's the important part.
Sure. This is all a big advertisement for his cobbler store.
My dresses are fantastic, but I'm a jerk. So
But of course, does it even need to be said? He's magnificent in this movie. Stands out from his other performances. He becomes the character.
I like they
as-
kind of chose something that's the polar opposite of his performance in There Will Be Blood or Lincoln, where they're kind of showy performances. Because I mean, they're still subtle because the movies are subtle and
Sure.
they're well directed, but you can kind of get the sense that he's playing like a bombastic character in There Will Be Blood because he's got the southern accent going and he's got the huge Nietzsche mustache going and the cowboy hat.
There are definitely those Oscar moments in those movies where he just explodes and you're just like, well,
he drinks your
he
milkshake
won-
indeed, my friend.
He won the award. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. There's not really that moment in these movies. He plays it very reserved.
He's kind of doing the opposite because he's playing a very subtle and quiet character who has loud outbursts, and it feels the opposite as it usually does. Because instead of just being someone who's like, I mean, maybe I'm
you
speaking,
can't. I mean, I don't know if you can say that Lincoln was
but yeah,
was very
well, he
a
obviously
loud character that
no,
had
but
quiet moments.
He's definitely chewing the scenery a little with Lincoln.
Sure, as you know, he deserves to. But aside from Daniel Day-Lewis, there as Leslie Mansville, I believe is her name, plays his sister in the movie, and Vicky Creeps.
Is she Alma? Or?
She is, yes, the young waitress that he falls very quickly in love with. That was something that stood out to me. How it was just he set his sights on her and
I don't know
kind
if
of
they fall in love right away. I think he has affections for her and he invites her to live with her relatively quickly. But how much do we want to talk about the plot on this? Because this is one of those films where there's kind of the fatwa has gone out on not talking about the plot because it's a big deal. But
It's not very twisty or turny, though. I think what it's billed as is what you're going to get.
I think there's one moment near the middle of the film where it takes a turn and it starts going in a different direction. But
Sure,
it's not
yeah.
like a shocking reveal. It makes sense within the context.
I think essentially you can narrow it down to Daniel Day-Lewis plays this fashion designer in 1950s London, works with duchesses and princesses from Europe, makes their dresses for their various balls and galas and weddings and
Yeah.
various engagements. And he's very particular. The movie describes him as possibly the most demanding man. And you totally buy it. But he backs up his intricacies and his kind of many quirks with magnificent work.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of strains you can kind of attack this film from, not like in a way to say it's bad because it's a masterpiece, but like you can approach this as kind of a metaphor for the inner life of the artist or kind of a meditation on toxic relationships.
Sure. Obsession is a huge theme throughout this. Insecurity, kind of comparing your work to the work of others and by comparison yourself to others, whether you see yourself as the best or you see yourself as somebody who is never enough.
Well, as he knows he's the best, though. Like, it's not like it's a question for Daniel
True,
Day-Lewis' character.
but Alma is his love interest, while invited to live with him, while quickly becoming his primary relationship. She also has to share his life with his sister, who is also his kind of partner in crime with
She's kind of an
this
extension
business.
of him, in a way.
Very much so. But he's also working with models constantly, and duchesses and princesses, beautiful women who come to him to make them clothes. And so he meets with them, interviews them, and Alma understandably kind of feels insecure and uncomfortable with him constantly meeting with these beautiful women and undressing them and redressing them.
Yeah. I think I mentioned earlier that I kind of unofficially called this episode the Fashion Week episode.
Sure.
I think like looking at the strain of both movies, there's kind of this interesting connection both of them, where they're both about like the surface of something being a disguise for something that's underneath it. Because you can kind of tell with the Phantom Thread, he's not just using this is a movie about a fashion designer as a gimmick. It's clearly about someone who's creating something beautiful to sell that covers a lack of something else that's within his character.
Sure.
And
Played definitely much more subtly in Phantom Thread.
Some Like It Hot does that differently in a completely flippant fashion.
Sure.
Where it's obviously about they're wearing disguises so that they aren't discovered and they can continue to live.
Right.
But, so I think that was kind of an interesting thread we saw through both movies, because we didn't plan for the films to have the same theme, which is why we get such disparate combinations of movies on this show. But
it managed to work out this week.
Yes, it's funny how it occasionally manages to work out. But
another thing that Alma has to share. I'm blanking on Daniel Day-Lewis's character's name. So
his name is Reynolds Woodcock.
Reynolds Woodcock,
which is an unfortunate name, but go on.
Well, it's British,
which
is unfortunate
they
in and of itself. But she not only has to share him with all those other women, but also with his work. The movie makes a point to show that a little bit of himself goes into every one of his dresses. I believe in every dress, writes or sews an inscription in the lining.
Yep.
As you can see there. And that kind of marks that dress with kind of his feelings at the time, or his current obsession, if you will.
Yeah, but overall, to kind of sum things up, masterpiece, worth checking out. Maybe not for everyone, but
it's very slow moving, beautiful. It kind of reminded me of Barry Lyndon in the sense that every frame of this could be in an art museum.
Yeah. Definitely check it out. If you get the chance, go check it out at the Music Box in Chicago, because they're an awesome theater. Join us for the final segment, where we'll get the movie recommendation for the week. Stay tuned.
Good coffee, huh? Oh my God! What are you doing in my apartment?
Hello, and welcome back to the final segment. We're going to hand things over to AJ once again to talk about his movie recommendation.
Well, as you know, I usually like to tie in my recommendation with the previous work of the directors we talk about. But as I mentioned, this is my first Billy Wilder, so I can't likely recommend another one of his works. I have seen all Paul Thomas Anderson's works, but I couldn't really nail one down to talk about specifically. So I decided to go with a complete curveball, and seeing as Some Like It Hot is considered one of the best comedies of all time, I decided to go with kind of a similar sounding comedy, Wet Hot American Summer. Has nothing to do with anything we talked about, but it's a movie I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite comedies.
It just kind of blew my mind there, but
I told you it was a curveball. I've got a good curve.
I applaud you, good sir.
Thank you very much. This movie came out in 2001 and stars pretty much every comedic actor working today. You got Paul Rudd, Amy Poehler, Bradley Cooper is in it. Joe Latruglio, I believe his name is. You can see him in Brooklyn Nine-Nine and many other small roles. Stars Michael Showalter, who's probably most recently known for directing The Big Sick this year, starring Kumail Nanjiani. Written and directed by Michael Showalter. David Wayne directs it and also writes it with him. It's very much in the same vein as kind of a Zucker Brothers spoof comedy. It's set in 1980, I believe the year 1980, on the last day of a summer camp, and kind of sends up those 80s camp comedies in the vein of Meatballs, I believe is the Bill Murray camp comedy. It's in that same vein, but also completely parodies it, and it just has a sense of fun and a sense of parody that I'm just drawn to. The number of jokes per minute in this movie, I think, rivals movies like Airplane, and I just love it. Every minute of it just has me on the floor laughing.
I have not seen that.
Haven't.
So.
I couldn't recommend it highly enough, obviously.
I was having a discussion with my family over Christmas break just recently, where they had asked me if they had seen any of the vacation movies, and I told them I never watched any of them.
Really?
Yeah, and they were like, Tyler, you're a film critic. How do you not watch the vacation movies?
Well, it's Christmas time.
My
you have to watch
response,
Christmas Vacation.
well, we ended up watching Vacation, but my response was, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm too busy watching Fellini. But yeah, I have a huge deficit of middle road films from 2010 backwards.
Sure,
so that's one of those films I just never kind of got to. So
yeah, you talk about Fellini and then you go into Death Wish 4, and so it's fascinating hearing your range and then hearing the movies you miss. So
it's eclectic.
It is. Wet Hot American Summer is a weird movie. It gets weird, but it's funny, and it's not for everybody. It's a weird sense of humor, but it works for me, and it's worth a watch, because if it works for you, it'll be one of you.
Okay, that's all the time we have for this. You can follow me on Twitter at NASocialCriti. That's critic without the C at the end. You can find more of my written reviews at Geeks Under Grace, which I was recently brought onto as a contributing writer, and the antisocialcritic.tumblr.com. And you can find more past recordings of the show at the Groupthink Productions YouTube page, as well as podcasts and several other movies we've done. I'm Tyler, and that's been the Fox Valley Film Critics. Have a wonderful day.